Good morning and welcome to First Baptist Church Guelph. We're glad you've joined us.
We're Miriam and Mike Weichert. We hope you feel a sense of community today as we worship together, even though we're staying apart. I hope you're having an awesome summer. So far, ours has been amazing. One of the things that brings me joy is to be outside, to be in my garden, to watch things grow. And even though I can't get very far, I do like to be outside, digging in the earth. I hope you find things that bring you joy.
As always, there's lots going on in our church community, and you can get information on all of that from Amy's Wednesday email, as well as you could go to the website and check out all the things that are there, including, in particular, the Stay Connected tab, where there's lots of information and reflections from people in our church.
Let's worship together.
Be still, there is a healer, and his love is deeper than the sea. His mercy, it is unfailing. His arms, a fortress for the weak. Let faith arise. Let faith arise. I lift my hands to believe again. You are my refuge, you are my strength. As I pour out my heart, these things I remember. You are faithful, God, forever. Be still, there is a river that flows from Calvary's to reach a fountain for the thirsty, and your grace that washes over me. Let faith arise. Let faith arise. I lift my hands to believe again. You are my refuge, you are my strength. As I pour out my You stood before creation, eternity in your hand. You spoke the earth into motion, my soul now to stand. You stood before my failure, carried the cross, my shame, my sin weighed upon your shoulder, my soul now to stand. What can I say? What can I do? Offer this heart, oh God, completely to you. So I walk upon salvation, your spirit alive in me, my life to declare your promise, my soul now to stand. So what can I say? What can I do? But offer this heart, oh God, completely to you. So what can I say? What can I do? But offer this heart, oh God, completely to you. So I'll stand with arms wide, unabandoned, in awe of the one who gave it all. I'll stand, my soul, Lord, to you surrendered. All I have is yours. And I'll stand with arms wide, unabandoned, in awe of the one who gave it all. And I'll stand, my soul, Lord, to you surrendered. All I am is yours. What can I say? What can I do? But offer this heart, oh God, completely to you.
The Lord is my shepherd. I have all that I need. He lets me rest in green meadows. He leads me beside peaceful streams. He renews my strength.
He guides me along right paths, bringing honor to his name. Even when I walk through the darkest valley, I will not be afraid, for you are close beside me. Your rod and your staff protect and they comfort me.
You prepare a feast for me in the presence of my enemies. You honor me by anointing my head with oil. My cup overflows with blessings. Surely your goodness and unfailing love will pursue me all the days of my life, and I will live in the house of the Lord forever.
Lord, I come, I confess, bowing here, I find my rest. Without you, I fall apart. You're the one that guides my heart. Lord, I need you. Oh, I need you. Every hour I need you. My one defense, my righteousness. Oh God, how I need you. Sin runs deep, your grace is more. Where grace is found is where you are, and where you are, Lord, I am free. Holiness is Christ in me, and where you are, Lord, I am free. Holiness is Christ in me. Lord, I need you. Oh, I need you. Every hour I need you. My one defense, my righteousness. Oh God, how I need you. So teach my song to rise to you. Oh, when temptation comes my way, when I cannot stand, I'll fall on you. Jesus, you're my hope and stay. When I cannot stand, I'll fall on you. Jesus, you're my hope and stay. Oh Lord, I need you. Oh, I need you. Every hour I need you. Oh, my one defense, my righteousness. Oh God, how I need you. You're my one defense, my righteousness. Oh God, how I need you.
I want to talk to you today about hospitality in the early Christian world. We struggle today within many Christian communities with how to welcome the stranger, how to truly extend a deep and authentic welcome. And we've got a wonderful resource from our early Christian brothers and sisters to help us learn and understand about hospitality. So that's what I'll be talking about. The first thing to be aware of is in the ancient world, lots of cultures practice hospitality. So it's not unique to Christianity, but we do have some dimensions, some components that we bring as Christians in the early Christian world to the table. And one of the first ones is just how we define hospitality. For early Christians, hospitality means most simply welcoming the stranger. And that is a deceptively simple definition, welcoming the stranger. But if you break that down, you have to think about who is the stranger and what is welcome. So I'm going to talk about each of these components. Who is the stranger? Within the early Christian world, they look back to the Hebrew prophets and the Old Testament initially to think about sort of the categories of people who are strangers. And we know from the Old Testament that those prophets, Amos, Hosea, Isaiah, often refer to vulnerable groups. So we can identify 5 groups of people that are vulnerable categories: the poor, the sick, orphans and widows, foreigners or sojourners, and those who are imprisoned or held captive in bondage. These are groups that the prophets identify again and again as requiring special care, special attention, special welcome. And so it's no surprise that in Matthew 25, Jesus himself also identifies these groups when he talks about those who will be welcomed. He identifies groups when he is telling the story of the Great Judgment. And the king says, "Come, those of you who are blessed, those of you who welcomed me as a stranger, who saw me thirsty and gave me something to drink, who saw me hungry and gave me something to eat, who visited me when I was sick and in prison." You hear the echo here of these same groups that warrant special care and attention, special welcome. And Jesus goes even further to say, "When you do this to the least of these, you do this to me." And so the stranger is identified by Jesus as Jesus himself, that when we welcome the stranger, we welcome Jesus. So in early Christianity, this was a key teaching, that welcoming the stranger was one way to be close to Christ. So if that's in general some of the strangers that are identified, what does welcome look like? What does welcome mean in the early Christian world? And it's important to remember that it depends on local context. Context matters if you're in the city, if you're in the country, what part of the empire you're in. But I think in general, we can begin to see some patterns that emerge of how welcome occurs. I've organized it into 4 movements that help identify steps in the process of welcome. The first movement is greeting. And greeting means greeting the stranger in any of these vulnerable categories, and often means not waiting for that stranger to come to me, but going out and visiting the sick, going to the prison in order to welcome those persons. So greeting isn't passive, it's very active, and it often requires, for early Christians, moving out into the world. The second movement is restoration. And restoration of the stranger involves all kinds of assistance, but just the basic needs. Someone traveling may need food, certainly shelter, often foot washing is one of the first things you do when you welcome a stranger. If they're sick, restoration includes medicine or healing, the things needed for health and well-being. And restoration can even include their animals. We have wonderful testimony in the early Christian world of not only welcoming the traveler, but his donkey, feeding it, being sure it has water. And so restoration, the second movement of welcome, is very broadly understood. Restoration can also include extending one's own social networks, what we might call today social capital, to the stranger. If it is someone foreign who's very vulnerable in the culture, then part of restoration is extending that social networking to that person. The third movement of welcome, from greeting to restoration, is dwelling together, just hanging out, just living life. And that means bringing the stranger into the mundane, ordinary activities, cooking a meal, working the land, helping out with chores. It can also include spiritual activities of praying together, worship together, inviting that stranger into the worshiping community. So after restoration comes being together. Early Christians tell a lot of stories about welcoming a stranger, and then once they've been restored with food and rest, asking their story. Where'd you come from? Tell me about your life. Tell me about what God's been doing in your life. So dwelling together can include that kind of sharing. The fourth and last movement is sending forth. One of the remarkable things about hospitality in the early Christian world is it was intended to not create long-term systems of dependence. It's not about giving a handout that people will continue to need, but restoring and dwelling together so that people can be sent on their way. Sometimes that even included tarrying with that stranger as they went on to the next stage of life or on to the next town, perhaps going part of the way with them or being sure they had food to get to their next destination. Sometimes sending forth included letters of introduction where Christians would say, I know this person, I want to introduce you to them, so that they would have some social networking when they got where they were going next, or when they went out to look for a job, or they went to the next stage of life. So these four movements roughly describe the pattern of welcome in the early Christian world. It's not always linear. These are just ways for us to begin to see how welcome works practically in the early Christian world. But certainly these steps might be in different orders. They might even loop around again, depending on where Christians are and what Christians are doing.
Blessed assurance, Jesus is mine. Oh, what a foretaste of glory divine, heir of salvation, purchase of God. Washed in his blood. This is my story. This is my song, praising my Savior all the day long. This is my story. This is my song, praising my Savior all the day long.
When the oceans rise and thunders roar, I will soar with you above the storm. Father, you are king over the flood. I will be still and know you are God. Oh, hide me now under your wing. Cover me within your mighty hand. When the oceans rise and thunders roar, I will soar with you above the storm. Father, you are king over the flood, and I will be still and know you are God. Find rest, my soul, in Christ alone. Oh, know His power in quietness and trust. When the oceans rise and thunders roar, I will soar with you above the storm. Father, you are king over the flood. I will be still and know you are God. When the oceans rise and thunders roar, I will soar with you above the storm. Father, you are king over the flood. And I will be still and know you are God. And I will be still, know you are God. Oh, I will be still and know you are God. Blessed assurance, Jesus is mine. Oh, what a foretaste of glory divine, heir of salvation, purchase of God, born of his Spirit, washed in his blood. This is my story, this is our story, and may it be all of our stories as we go out into our week, as we go out into our lives, and what God has for us this week. Thanks for being with us. God bless.